The room feels suspended in an old kind of quiet, the kind that survives decades without breaking. Dust floats in slow spirals through the thin rectangle of light leaking from a crooked window. The wallpaper has paled into a washed-out memory of yellow, its pattern barely visible, and the floorboards hold a faint smell of varnish and time, as if they've been waiting for someone to step across them once more. It is here, in this forgotten apartment on the Upper West Block, that the silence lifts just enough to let the past breathe again. The air carries nothing sharp, nothing alarming, yet still manages to press against the skin with a steady, watchful heaviness. The investigator, Daniel Moore, stands inside the doorway as if he has disturbed a room that never learned to move on. His breath appears slow, measured, respectful. He walks in without touching the walls, treating the space like a fragile memory. The case file under his arm feels heavier than paper should. He doesn't open it yet. Instead, he lets his eyes adjust to the dimness, as though he expects the room to speak first. This was where they found her. Lily Armand, age 28. A painter whose small studio in Brooklyn had failed to pay rent that summer. A woman who spent her nights working at a corner cafe and her days mixing colors no one else could see. Daniel remembers details that never left him, her handwriting on old receipts, the soft edge of her voice on a recorded order, the last photograph taken of her near the river. He remembers everything because forgetting would have made it easier, and he never allowed himself that luxury. The apartment belonged to a friend of hers, someone who spent that July out of town, unaware that a spare key had been used, unaware that the space had become a final backdrop. Investigators came, asked, measured, photographed, but the room gave them nothing that led anywhere. A smear on a doorknob uncertain, a displaced shoe near the radiator, the faint outline of a cup on the table, nothing fit, nothing held, and the case drifted until it fell into the dust beneath years of louder stories. Daniel steps forward slowly, each footfall exhaling a small puff of age from the floor. His eyes move to the table, still sitting at the center, still holding a ring of discoloration where something once rested. He had placed his gloved hand over this mark years ago, believing it would matter. Now he touches the edge again, ungloved, brushing it lightly. The surface is smooth and cold. He sets the case file down. The sound, soft as it is, folds into the room like a returning echo. Inside the folder, photos, statements, timelines, and a single envelope containing a recently surfaced item. A photograph arriving from a private storage unit downtown, one that belonged to a retired officer who passed earlier in the year. The officer's collection of unsorted items included several undocumented photos from old cases. Among them, a blurry, badly lit snapshot of this very apartment taken the night Lily was found. The angle doesn't match official shots. It was taken earlier, before the scene was cleared, before personnel were limited. Daniel lifts the photograph carefully. The edges are curled, the image slightly warped. In the dim lighting, the picture shows the table, the radiator, and something barely visible near the window, a faint shape, a shadow where no one had reported standing. At first glance, it looks like nothing, just a trick of bad lighting, but something about the angle feels intentional. Someone had been standing there just out of frame, and whoever took the photo caught a fraction of them. He brings the photo closer to the window, tilting it. The shadow sharpens. Not a person exactly, more a suggestion of someone's presence. The curve of a shoulder maybe, or the edge of fabric. The more he studies it, the more a faint recognition presses against him, a familiarity he can't quite name. He returns the photo to the table, taking a slow breath. The room holds its silence again. Daniel kneels by the radiator. The metal has aged, its paint flacking in soft curls. Lily's shoe had been found here, a single white flat, worn on the heel as if she had walked fast often. He remembers lifting it, thinking how small it looked. The report had mentioned that the shoe was angled oddly, as though moved after she had fallen, but no one could decide what that meant. He stands, letting the details settle. The window is locked now. Decades ago, it had been slightly ajar. A draft had moved through the curtains the night they photographed the scene. The curtains remain stiff and faded. Daniel touches the frayed edge. No dust falls. Strange. He brushes it again. Still clean. The rest of the room holds years of forgotten particles, yet these curtains look as though someone touched them recently. That small inconsistency lifts a quiet thread of curiosity. He steps back. The light through the window shifts as clouds pass outside. The room grows a shade darker. Daniel opens the case file again, flipping to the statement from the apartment's owner. The friend had said she always kept the curtains tied back because they dragged dust from the sill. Photos from the original investigation show them tied, but now they hang loose. Someone had been here more recently than anyone realized. Daniel looks around again, slower now, searching for anything out of place. The corner near the closet catches his eye not for what it holds but for what it lacks. A faint square on the wall, cleaner than the area around it, as though something had hung there, shielding the wallpaper from dust and light. But there is nothing on the floor, no fallen frame, no discarded hook. He steps closer, running a hand over the clean rectangle. The shape is small, about the size of a postcard. A photo, a note. Something had been here for a long time, then removed long after the case was considered cold. He photographs the spot with his phone, even though the act feels almost redundant. The emptiness speaks clearly enough. On the table, a soft scrape pulls his attention. Only the building settling, he tells himself. Old wood, old walls, nothing more. Still, he turns. And there it is again. That sense of someone having stood in the room recently, not malicious, not abrupt, just present in a way that unsettles the carefully archived stillness. He sits at the table and opens the envelope containing the newly found photo. He places it beside another official image taken from a similar angle. The differences between them feel like mismatched breaths. In the official one, the area near the window is empty. In the unofficial one, something interrupts the space, a faint sliver of form. He closes his eyes, letting his memory drift back to the night he first entered the apartment. The heat had been heavy. The lights from the street had flickered through the open window. Officers spoke in low, uncertain tones, and he remembers someone standing near the window, someone he assumed belonged to the building crew, or perhaps the friend who owned the apartment. But that person never appeared in any report. A small detail, one he brushed past at the time, too focused on procedure. Now it returns with the sharp clarity of a once-forgotten thought. He opens the file to the timeline section. Lily was last seen leaving the cafe at 10:34. She had told a coworker she needed to pick up something from a friend's apartment. She carried her sketch bag. She walked alone. She didn't take the subway. She preferred walking when the air cooled at night. She entered the building at 11:12, according to the tenant who heard the stairwell door shut. No one saw her leave. Daniel traces the numbers with his finger. The times create a narrow margin. Barely 40 minutes between when she arrived and when a neighbor heard an unusual thud, one they attributed to heavy pipes. 40 minutes. Enough time for someone to meet her here, enough time for something to shift. He leans back, letting the chair creak. His reflection wavers in the window's glass. Behind him, the room appears smaller than he remembers, more fragile, more deliberate. He thinks of Lily's life, her unfinished canvases, her habit of writing dates on the backs of her sketches, her last recorded purchase, a small box of charcoal pencils. She lived simply but with intention. Nothing about her patterns suggested carelessness. which makes the angle of the shoe, the shifted curtain, the missing object from the wall all the more telling. He returns to the subtle rectangle on the wall. He kneels again, checking the lower molding. Dust thins in a tiny arc as if something had brushed or swung near it. A thin nail rests embedded in the wood, old but firm. Whatever hung there had been removed carefully, leaving only an absence. He exhales, slow and steady. The file contains no mention of anything hanging on this wall. Not a note, not a calendar, not a postcard. Yet the clean space says otherwise. He sits back at the table again. This time he notices something on the underside of the case file flap, a faint smear of charcoal. He lifts his thumb. A thin, dark line marks his skin. Charcoal. From Lily's pencils. From her sketch bag. He checks the envelope again. A tiny flake of dark pigment clings to the edge. It must have transferred from the photograph, though the photograph shows no visible contact with her art supplies. Where had this charcoal come from? He scans the room again. The radiator, the floor, the corners. Then he sees it barely noticeable on the baseboard beneath the window. A faint dark streak. Not dirt, not dust. Something rubbed there with intention or by accident. He approaches slowly, tracing the streak with his eyes. The mark aligns perfectly with where someone might have knelt or braced themselves. The height suggests a hand brushing against the wall, someone carrying something or picking something up, something with charcoal on its surface. Daniel crouches, feeling an old weight pressing through him. He recalls Lily's sketch bag, canvas, worn on one strap, always coated with a fine layer of charcoal dust from her pencils. If someone had picked it up and moved it even briefly, they might have left marks like this. But her bag had been found neatly at the foot of the table in the official report, untouched, unmoved. Yet the streak says otherwise. Something had been tampered with, and then placed back carefully, as if to suggest nothing was disturbed. Daniel stands again, slower this time. He looks toward the closet. The door is slightly ajar, though he remembers it being fully closed years ago. He walks toward it. The handle feels cold. He pushes gently. The hinges complain in a soft, tired way. Inside, dust coats the upper shelf, thick and undisturbed, except for a single line through it, as if a small object had once rested there and was recently removed. Another absence. Another subtraction. The shape is too small for a sketchbook, too narrow for a box, about the size of the rectangle on the wall. He imagines Lily standing here, placing something on the shelf, something important enough to hide, something someone else came back for. The silence seems to tighten around him. He looks back at the table, at the photograph, at the heavy case file filled with conclusions that now feel premature. Something simple, something small, something logical, something missing. Daniel closes his eyes again, letting the details move through him like slow currents. The room has been trying to tell him something since the moment he entered. And now, finally, the pattern begins to form. Daniel opens his eyes slowly, as if adjusting to two timelines at once, the room as it was and the room as it should have been. The faint charcoal smear beneath the window seems to pulse with meaning. He studies it again, then shifts his gaze to the photograph lying on the table. That faint, almost invisible shape near the window, the shoulder-like curve, the suggestion of someone half concealed. He can almost see the motion now, the small but deliberate act of removing something from the wall and placing it carefully in the closet, and the even quieter act of returning later, perhaps years later, to reclaim it. He moves back to the rectangular clean space on the wall. The light catches the outline more clearly now. He slides a fingertip along it. The room may be dim, but the absence carries its own kind of brightness, as if the wall is trying to recall the pressure of an object long held there. Something once hung here, something Lily placed herself, something someone else removed. He turns toward the case file. For a long moment he just stares at it, listening to the faint hum of the city through the dusty windows. Then he opens the file and pulls out Lily's personal background sheet, her work history, her notes, the list of belongings found in her apartment. He flips through the pages with a detached rhythm until he finds the inventory. Her sketch bag, paintbrushes, a folded jacket, a small notebook only half examined. The contents of the notebook were summarized once, long ago, short personal observations, half-finished ideas for paintings, color combinations she wanted to try. But Daniel remembers something else. The notebook had a pocket inside the back cover. At the time, he assumed it was empty because the officer who logged the item wrote "pocket," empty, in neat handwriting. That officer was the same one whose storage unit later produced the unofficial photograph. Daniel feels the slow start of a possibility. Not certainty, just a shape forming in the distance. He closes the folder and stands. His footsteps send soft vibrations through the old floor as he walks back toward the window. The curtain shifts slightly with his movement, whispering against the air. He pulls it back gently, looking at the sill beneath it. Dust lies there, but not as much as the rest of the room. A narrow line cuts across the surface, as if something thin had been dragged or lifted away. He crouches and studies it. The line is faint, but it runs directly toward the radiator. He follows it with his gaze, then stops when the streak beneath the window comes into view again. A movement catches his eye, just the building settling, another small complaint of aging wood. Still, it pulls him toward the radiator once more. He kneels and examines the area around the baseboard. Another streak appears, even fainter than the first. It angles upward, toward the small section of molding where the paint has chipped more recently than the rest of the room. He brushes a fingertip lightly along it. A thin trace of charcoal comes away. Lily's charcoal. Her bag had been moved around this space in a way that contradicts the official record. Someone handled it, then placed it back in its original position before investigators arrived. Someone who knew what they were looking for. The thought carries a low, steady weight. He rises and steps back to the center of the room. The silence seems to follow him, as if watching, waiting. He looks once more at the photograph from the storage unit. The faint shape near the window no longer feels like a trick of the eye. It feels like a presence, a memory of movement captured by accident. He tilts the photo again. The grain catches the light differently, revealing the outline more clearly. A hint of fabric, a slope that could be a shoulder, a dark blur that could be hair. Not Lily. Someone else. Someone present before the scene was officially documented. Daniel places the photograph beside the official one once more. The contrast between them sharpens the truth. The unofficial shot captured something that the official investigation never acknowledged. He steps back, drawing a slow breath. The air tastes faintly metallic, as if the old pipes are rusting behind the walls. He listens again, creaks, groans, the distant hum of traffic. Nothing more, but the sensation of being watched lingers. He walks toward the closet again. Inside, the dust tells a simple story, a long-term resting place for something small, something roughly postcard-sized, something that stayed there for years without disturbance. And then it was removed, recently. Not by the current property owners. They boarded this floor years ago. Not by building staff. They stopped entering the upper levels without maintenance orders long before that. Only someone with a reason related to Lily would come. He steps back and closes the closet gently. The soft click of the latch feels too loud. The next logical step sits quietly in his mind. The missing object on the wall held meaning, enough meaning for someone to return for it decades later. He returns to the table and reopens the case file to the witness statements. There were only a few. A neighbor who heard the stairwell door. A man on the street who saw Lily walking. A passerby who remembered her jacket. And the friend who owned the apartment, whose absence that night was verified by travel records. Nothing in the statements mentioned visitors, arguments, or unexpected appearances. No conflicts, no unresolved tensions. Lily lived quietly, socially distant, absorbed in her work. Daniel flips to the friend's statement again. She used to leave small things in my apartment sometimes. Notes, color swatches. I told her she was welcome any time. Notes, color swatches. Lily worked visually. She communicated visually. She left things behind intentionally, sometimes as reminders for herself, sometimes as quiet acknowledgments for others. Daniel reads the line again, notes. His eyes shift slowly to the clean rectangle on the wall. A note. A small one. On the wall. Removed. He turns back to the closet, considering the timeline again. If Lily removed something from her sketch bag, something she placed on the wall, it would explain the charcoal streaks. If someone came later to take it, that person would have known its value before anyone else did. A small note. A message. Something quiet, unseen, left behind in a moment of uncertainty. Daniel sits again at the table. His mind begins to align the small clues. The charcoal smears. The moved curtains. The faint streak near the baseboard. The clean rectangle on the wall. The object removed from the closet shelf. The shadow in the unofficial photograph. Each detail alone is nothing, but together they create a slender but undeniable thread. He pulls the unofficial photograph closer. He studies the angle of the window. The perspective places the photographer near the door, shooting toward the far wall. Anyone standing close to the window would have appeared only as a partial silhouette, which means the officer who took this photo might have seen someone leaving the apartment. But he didn't include that information in the report. He didn't even acknowledge taking the photo. Daniel thinks back to the retired officer's reputation, quiet, methodical, but known for bending rules when he believed it helped. His personal storage unit contained items removed from several cases. Nothing malicious recorded, just a habit of taking copies of photos and unofficial notes. But if he saw someone leaving the apartment the night Lily was found? Daniel returns the photo to the table and presses his fingertips to the surface lightly. The texture feels brittle, like memory. He opens the file again and pulls out the small personal background section on the officer. It lists his career milestones, his transfers, his commendations. Near the bottom is a line that catches Daniel's attention. Partnered with Officer Helen Merrow, 1976 to 1978. He remembers her. Helen had a reputation for extraordinary thoroughness, the kind that made colleagues both respect and avoid her. She had been working another case the night Lily was found, but she visited the scene the next evening to review the files. Daniel recalls her asking a question he dismissed at the time. Was anything on the wall? He had answered no. She had nodded slowly, as if expecting the answer but uncertain. He reaches for her statement, there is none. She never filed one. She reviewed the case, made a few verbal observations, then moved on. He remembers one more detail. She had been a friend of Lily's cousin. A distant one, but still enough of a connection for her to have seen Lily's art before. The thread tightens. Daniel stands again and walks to the wall. He touches the rectangle once more. He imagines Lily standing here in the dim apartment, pulling a piece of charcoal from her bag, writing something small, placing it carefully behind a frame or pinning it to the wall. A message not for everyone, just for someone. He imagines someone else finding it, someone who understood its meaning. He imagines that person removing it quietly, placing it on the closet shelf, leaving it there for decades, hidden in dust. And after the officer's passing, someone else, someone with access or memory, coming back to retrieve it. He takes another slow breath. The absence on the wall is louder now. He turns to the table and looks again at the official inventory. The notebook's pocket marked empty. The same pocket that could have easily held a small note, small enough to go unnoticed, small enough to slip out during processing. He flips back to Lily's employer's statement. One line stands out in its simplicity. She carried small notes everywhere, reminders, ideas, sentences to herself. She said they helped her remember what mattered. Sentences to herself. He looks at the rectangle on the wall. It could have been one sentence. He steps back again, letting the details assemble themselves. Lily wrote something. She placed it here. Someone found it. Someone knew what it meant. Someone removed it. And that small, missing sentence held the logic of everything that followed. Daniel's gaze returns to the faint charcoal streak. It points toward the wall like an arrow, a subtle, nearly invisible guide. The room feels smaller now, as if the air has paused in recognition. The shadows sit heavier around the corners. Daniel walks back to the table and sits again, feeling the stiff chair support him like an old companion. He listens to his own heartbeat echoing faintly in his ears. A simple sentence on a wall, a quiet truth, something that connected the people in Lily's life or separated them. He thinks of all the small details he collected years ago, her paintings, her habits, her movements, her solitude, her careful precision. He thinks of motivations that aren't loud, motivations that whisper instead of shout. And then, almost gently, the realization begins to settle. Not a dramatic twist. Not a coincidence. A logical truth. Something someone tried to hide by removing a note and leaving nothing behind but a clean rectangle on a forgotten wall. The weight of it presses against him. The room's stillness thickens. He exhales slowly and starts putting the pieces together. Daniel remains seated at the table for a long moment, letting the room breathe around him, letting the faint pressure of dust and memory settle across his shoulders. The truth forming in his mind isn't loud. It doesn't arrive with shock or revelation. It comes quietly, the way slow dawn pushes against night, not with brilliance but with certainty. He lifts the unofficial photograph again. The faint silhouette near the window stands out now with unmistakable clarity. Not a stranger, not an intruder, someone familiar to the case, someone trusted enough for their presence to be overlooked. He looks at the outline carefully, the slope of the shoulder, the way the figure angles slightly, as if half-turned toward the wall, and then he remembers something he had buried under years of routine. The officer who arrived late that night to assist with documentation. Officer Helen Merrow. She had entered the apartment after most of the initial team had finished their work. She walked through the scene with quiet intent, asking few questions. She had carried a small notebook pressed tightly against her chest. She had taken no official photos, not that anyone saw, and she left the building quickly. Daniel had assumed she was simply being thorough, the kind of thorough that made her well known. But what if she had come not just to observe the case, but to observe something specific? He turns his attention back to the clean rectangle on the wall. A small note. Placed with purpose. Removed with purpose. He imagines Helen pausing here, reading whatever Lily had left. Maybe a line, maybe a name, maybe a message meant for someone who would understand it differently. He studies the charcoal streak again. It aligns with where someone might have braced a knee while reaching for the note. Someone who handled it gently. Someone who hid it in the closet until they could return. He walks back to the closet and opens it once more with slow care. His eyes trace the dusty shelf. The clean strip remains, a thin horizontal absence. The size matches the rectangle on the wall. Something hung, something removed, something stored. The thought settles deeper. Daniel closes the closet and steps back, mentally reconstructing the timeline. Lily arrives. She enters the apartment. She removes something from her sketch bag. Charcoal smears show where it brushed the wall. She places a note behind a small frame or pins it to the wall. Someone else enters, possibly someone she trusted. They see the note. They remove it. They hide it on the closet shelf. Then they leave. Later that same night, during the chaotic moments after Lily is found, Helen arrives. The room is shifting with footsteps and quiet instructions. She moves through the space delicately. She sees the object in the closet, knows immediately what it means, and without drawing attention, she takes it. Daniel presses a hand to the table. The wood feels cold, grounding. He had never questioned her involvement before. She had always been distant yet reliable, but people are rarely just their reputations, and motives are not always dramatic. Some come from loyalty, from long-standing debts, from quiet connections no one else sees. He returns to the case file and opens the page listing Lily's family. One name carries a faint underline: Lily Armand, her cousin. His name appears twice, once as emergency contact, once as the person who identified her belongings. Casper had been interviewed briefly, offering little more than a few soft-spoken memories of Lily's childhood. Nothing personal, nothing revealing. He lived across the city, worked at a warehouse. Nothing unusual. Except that he had been close friends with Officer Helen Marrow. Daniel remembers seeing them once outside a diner, both quiet, both comfortable in shared silence. It didn't seem important then. He flips to Helen's background sheet again. She had transferred from Borough Patrol to Investigations around 1976. Casper's address was not far from the precinct she started in. Connections begin to link. Daniel's pulse remains steady, almost eerily calm. The pieces are fitting with slow inevitability. He remembers Lily's last purchase, the charcoal pencils. She used them often for quick notes. If she had written something urgent, something meant to explain a sudden shift in her life, or a choice, or a discovery, it could have taken the form of a small charcoal-written message. He imagines it, a brief sentence, written quietly, pinned to the wall of her friend's apartment for safety. Not a confession, not a plea, just truth. Truth that someone, Casper perhaps, was afraid would reshape the story in a way he could not control. But what truth? Daniel turns back to the inventory of Lily's belongings, her notebook, her sketches, her last recorded visits. One line from her cafe coworker echoes faintly. She said she needed to sort something important. Sort something important. He scans the record of her last days. She had been visiting her old studio, gathering unfinished pieces. clearing things out. Someone else had access to that studio. Casper had helped her move items months earlier. If she discovered something during that process, something that connected to him, she might have written a note to document it. She was methodical with her thoughts. Daniel looks again at the faint charcoal streak under the window. It is small but deliberate, a trace left by someone who touched her sketch bag. He touches the streak gently. The pigment transfers lightly onto his fingertip. A sentence to herself, he thinks, something that might have shifted the balance of trust. He sees the logic forming. Lily uncovered something about Casper, something he didn't want known. She wrote it down, intending to keep it safe. She placed it in the only place she felt temporarily protected, the apartment of a friend. Casper followed her. A confrontation happened. The details remained quiet, controlled, delicate. And Helen, loyal to Casper, later removed the note to keep the truth from surfacing. No dramatic confrontation. No loud conflict. Just a quiet attempt to protect a friend. Daniel closes the file. The air in the room feels stiller now, as if the space has been waiting for someone to name what it has been holding. He turns toward the window, watching the muted gray light shift across the floorboards. He knows he can't accuse anyone based on absences, dust patterns, or faint charcoal marks. Logic leads him to a possibility, but evidence remains thin. The case may never yield enough clarity for a formal conclusion. But truth doesn't always require a courtroom. Sometimes it settles in the mind, subtle and undeniable. Daniel walks back to the rectangular outline on the wall. He places his palm flat against it. The wallpaper is cool beneath his skin. He feels nothing, yet somehow the absence speaks louder than any object could. He imagines the note, the message Lily left, a small piece of insight, perhaps something like, "I know what happened. Lore. I saw the truth at the studio." Or even something simpler, quieter. "Not who I thought." A line like that would be enough for someone close to her to react, not with panic, but with the fear of losing trust, of losing connection, of being seen in a light they could not bear. A simple misunderstanding turned irreversible. Not malice, not anger, just human fragility. Daniel steps away from the wall, letting the thought settle. The truth, assembled piece by logical piece, paints a softer, more complex picture than any dramatic reveal could. He returns to the table and closes the file fully. The sound is soft but final. Then he takes one last slow walk around the room. Each detail feels part of a delicate map, one that guided him through absence rather than presence. He stops near the window again. The curtain hangs still. The faint line on the sill remains. He brushes the fabric lightly. No dust falls. Something human had stood here. Someone who cared enough to hide a truth they felt couldn't survive daylight. Daniel steps back, listening once more. The building murmurs. The city hums faintly outside. A gust of wind pushes a thin breath of air through the cracks in the frame. He doesn't speak. There is no one to answer. He leaves the window and stands at the doorway. The dim room stretches before him, quiet, patient, unchanged. A small universe of stillness holding onto its last secret with quiet dignity. He picks up the case file. The weight feels familiar. He holds it with both hands, not out of burden but out of respect. Cases are often solved through facts, statements, evidence, but some find resolution through understanding, an understanding that arrives gently, without fanfare. As he steps out into the hall, he glances back once more. The room remains mute, a fading memory held together by dust and light. He walks down the narrow corridor, each footstep blending into the wooden rhythm of the building. The stairs creak beneath his weight. Outside, the air carries a soft chill. He stands on the sidewalk for a moment, letting the sounds of the city wash over him. Cars roll by, a distant horn, the muffled laughter of people far removed from the quiet tragedy of long-forgotten rooms. Daniel looks at the sky, gray heavy, yet somehow open. He exhales slowly. Justice, he knows, will unfold in the mechanical way it always does. Interviews, reports, quiet recommendations, no dramatic declarations, no sweeping revelations. But something human remains, the small act of recognizing the truth, even when the world never hears it. The fragile understanding that people carry secrets not out of harm, but out of fear, loyalty, or love. And that sometimes the finest answers come from listening to what isn't there. He holds the case file a little tighter. The weight feels different now, not lighter, not heavier, just honest. He turns and begins to walk down the street, blending into the muted rhythm of New York. The story, though unanswered in paper, is clearer in his mind than ever before. A sentence once hung on a forgotten wall. A truth small enough to hide. A life quiet enough to overlook. But the message remains, even in absence. Not solved in the way reports require, but understood in the only way that matters.